and welcome back to the Dive Line with Jim and Craig. Hi, Craig.
Hi, Jim. How you doing? I'm so excited about this episode.
Yeah, me too. Really excited. So we've got coming up the interview with Sea Shepherd Captain Peter Hammarstedt of the Bob Barker. But before that, a man that really needs no introduction at all is the founder of Sea Shepherd, Mr. Paul Watson.
Hi,
Welcome,
Paul. How are you?
Thanks.
Yeah, great. And thank you so much for coming on and doing this little intro to the interview we did with Peter. And we're really excited by the fact that you have agreed to come on and do a more in-depth interview in the very near future. So we'll certainly look forward to that. With regards to Peter, obviously, you've worked with him for many years and in very close proximity in some very stressful situations. What can you tell us about his character and how he is?
Well, Peter's been with Sea Shepherd since he was 18 years old, so it's pretty much all his adult life. And he's been probably our most committed and courageous captain out there on the high seas, and has done remarkable work, especially his organizing and leading of the anti-poaching campaigns in African waters.
Yeah, that some of the stories that, first of all, Peter told, but obviously what we read in the media, and he is quite a special character. And for anyone that hasn't read the book Chasing Thunder, I know one of our guests, Polly, is a big fan and put me into that book some time ago. It's a must read for anybody, particularly divers and people interested in Sea Shepherd and the conservation work they do.
Yeah, it's incredible. But the Chasing the Thunder, historically, it's the longest pursuit of a poacher in maritime history. So Peter will certainly be in the history books for that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he did tell us he started from sort of being a oily rag in the engine room, and now he's one of the directors of campaigns. I mean, that's a hell of a story to tell, isn't it?
Well, yeah. Well, in Sea Shepherd, we try to we're interested in people who are really passionate about this cause, and they don't really have to have much experience when they join, but really passionate people rise up through the ranks really fast.
Yeah, and Peter's definitely one of those.
And then he went on and got his certification for being a master mariner. Did the schooling for that, and so he's a professional sailor in every sense.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that, Paul. That's really interesting. That interview's coming up with Peter. We've got some questions for you. We've got one each from myself and Craig, but we've also got some questions from a couple of guests. Simon Bell from Simply Diving in the Costa del Sol. So we'll bring Simon in. Hello, Simon.
Hello there, Jim. How are you doing? Hello, everybody.
Hi, Simon.
And we've got Polly Wake from Crystal Sea Scuba in Norwich. Hello, Polly.
Hello. Hi, everybody.
Hi. How are we all doing?
Yeah, great. Thank you.
Super.
Excellent. Okay, so like we say, we've got a few questions. I think Craig's going to kick us off. So, Craig, would you like to give your question to Paul?
Yes. So, Paul, you were obviously one of the co-founders of Greenpeace, and that's all very well documented. My question is, when you started Sea Shepherd in 1977, did you have any concept of how big this thing would grow into? Or at that time, was it just a question of being a bit frustrated and wanting to do something that gave you the opportunity to take your own action?
Well, I never gave much thought to it at the time. I learned a long time ago that, you concentrate what you're doing on the present, and that will define what the future will be. So I really didn't give any thought to the future. But I had an idea in my mind that what I wanted, and that was not for an organization, but to develop a movement. And I think that's what we've achieved.
Yeah, you certainly have. I couldn't agree with you more. Thank you. Polly, if you'd like to put your question to Paul.
Great. Thank you. Hello, Paul. So we've all seen the hairy and scary moments that you've experienced on board your ships, on Whale Wars and on the Sharkwater film, which I loved. And we know how serious it can be. But have there been any funny moments or humorous situations that you can recall finding yourself in or experiencing while on board?
Well, we have a lot of humorous moments because when you're on ships for months at a time, there's a lot of practical jokes being done. I think probably one of the funniest one we ever did was when we had the Sea Shepherd 2. There was a space between the hull and the cabins in the lower deck, and when new crew members would get in there, about 2 o'clock in the morning, we would get behind the walls with chains and say things like "Help me," and develop this whole haunted ship sort of thing, and every crew member went through that whole.
Brilliant.
How cruel. Thank you, Polly, for that. Great question. Simon,
brilliant question. Simon.
Yeah, hello, Paul. My question is something like along the lines of, well, it seems that sometimes Sea Shepherd is kind of alone out there on the high seas, fighting the good fight, and there doesn't seem to be really any other organizations such as Sea Shepherd doing this great work. And I wonder if you think that us as scuba divers, after all, we're in touch with the ocean and we call ourselves ocean ambassadors. Do you think that us as scuba divers could do more to not just support Sea Shepherd, but do more to promote conservation of the ocean and combat pollution and stuff like that?
Well, I've always said that the three groups that are ambassadors for the ocean are divers, surfers, and sailors. And divers have been very active. Not, we have divers with Sea Shepherd, but there's been divers independently all over the world who have been doing things like removing ghost nets and doing surveys of, the conditions on in areas and that. So I think that there is a very active movement of divers around the world that are involved in these issues. And I know it's a tremendous contribution for all of those divers who are involved in removing ghost nets and all over the world. So right now we're removing nets in Egypt, and I know that in the UK that there's an ongoing campaign to remove nets from UK waters.
Yeah, Craig was actually going to be doing his ghost net course, weren't you, in September, but that's been called off because of the virus.
No, actually, earlier this year we was doing the GhostNet course with GhostNet UK, and yeah, as you say, that got called off, and I'm looking forward to doing that later in the year. But Rich Walker, who you may know, Paul, he's actually coming on next week on a little bit of promotion on our podcast, just to talk about ghost nets and the future and what divers can do to help there in reporting ghost nets that they see when they're diving. Jim, you've got a question for Paul too.
Yeah, I have. Yeah, it's quite a simple question, really. It's just, obviously, when we get back to normal, whatever normal may be, sometime in the near future, and we've got a bit more freedom, what's next for Paul Watson?
Well, we have campaigns all over the world right now, patrolling the coast of Africa, trying to protect or keep the vaquita from going extinct in the Sea of Cortez. We'll be doing campaigns to protect the marine reserves in Mapello Island around Colombia, Cocos Island around Costa Rica, and we've had an ongoing campaign to protect the Galapagos Marine Reserve for the last 20 years, and be expanding those programs to protect marine reserves. What we've found is that that's really workable is the partnerships that we're creating with governments around the world. We provide the resources and the people, they provide us with the authority to intervene. And that's resulted in the arrest of 52 poaching vessels in Africa. It's resulted in the confiscation of over 1,000 illegal nets in the Sea of Cortez. And that really gives us a boost, because once you're in national waters, you're always sort of hampered by the fact that, you don't really have a lot of authority there. Outside in international waters, we have more leeway. But we've been able to make a lot of inroads in territorial waters through these partnerships. And I think we've got over 24 countries that we're partnered with now.
Yeah, I think we touched on it, didn't we, with Peter coming up. We touched on the Liberian government that offered you or gave you the military honor for getting rid of all the poaching vessels.
Yeah, and also our partnership with Mexico has been very, very effective in dealing with the poachers in the Sea of Cortez. So we're working in partnership with the various Mexican departments, including the Mexican Navy.
I'd imagine it's really a never-ending battle that you face, really, isn't it?
Unfortunately, yes, and it's going to get worse. I mean, the ocean's under incredible assault from all, everything from, overfishing to plans to go and harvest plankton down in the Southern Ocean, to pollution, to acidification, to climate. So many factors that are threatening the ocean. And the one message that I constantly try to get across is that if the ocean dies, we all die. Our entire survival is dependent upon a healthy ocean, and every time we diminish an ecosystem, we diminish ourselves.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Paul,
absolutely.
does it get perhaps a little bit disheartening after all of these years of doing what you do? And as you just said, it can get worse. It possibly will. Do you feel that the never-ending circle that you can't ever loop means that it's so frustrating that after all these years you're still having to do it? I mean, I guess that you would feel if you had nothing to do, you've won.
No, I learned a very valuable lesson way back in 1973. I was a medic for the American Indian movement during the occupation of Wounded Knee in South Dakota. And we were surrounded by about 3,000 federal troops that were shooting at us, about 20,000 rounds a night. They wounded 46, killed 2. I went to Russell Means, who was the leader of the American Indian movement. I said, look, the odds are against us. We have no hope of winning here. Why are we here? And he told me something that stayed with me for the rest of my life. He said, well, we're not concerned about the odds against us, and we're not concerned about winning or losing. We're here because this is the right place to be, the right time to do it, and the right thing to do. So you work in the present to find the future.
Absolutely.
Don't worry about the future. I mean, the future will be what the future will be. All you can do is act in the present.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we can't wait to get a more in-depth interview with you coming up, Paul. We really appreciate you coming on. We're going to turn over to Peter shortly, but for all of us, I think we'd all like to say a very big thank you. Great to meet you, and we look forward to seeing you again in a couple of weeks' time.
Okay, thank you. Nice talking.
Thank you very much, Paul. Thank you. See you soon.
Okay, bye.
We're absolutely thrilled to welcome a true ocean warrior, a man that spent his whole life protecting our oceans from poachers, illegal fishing and whalers. He's the Director of Campaigns for Sea Shepherd Global and Captain of the Bob Barker, Mr. Peter Hammarstedt. So welcome, Peter. Hello.
Thank you so much for having me on the show.
Hi, Peter. Welcome. Thank you very much for joining us. How is sunny California?
Sunny California lives up to its name, but because of the stay-at-home order here, we're not going out to the beaches. We're not going out to the parks. We're catching up on reading at home and only doing the essential things we have to do. California is taking a pretty strict take on the coronavirus.
Yeah, there's a big difference between East and West Coast. They're all pals of mine in Florida are all out diving this last weekend.
It's very different. I think people forget how diverse this country really is. There's 50 states. They're very, very different politically. They're different culturally. It's a very, very diverse country. So California was one of the first states in the country that put in place a stay-at-home order, and it probably will be one of the states that holds on to it the longest.
Yeah, it's almost like 50 different countries rather than 50 states.
Very much so.
Yeah, Jim.
Obviously, we're going to be talking to you about whale wars, chasing the thunder, and Sea Shepherd in general. But before we do that, Peter, and for those that have been living in the dark ages, don't know who you are or who Sea Shepherd are, maybe you could tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into a Sea Shepherd.
So Sea Shepherd is an international marine conservation organization that exists to uphold international conservation law, to work with developing island and coastal states to stop illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing, to defend critical marine habitats. We're not a protest organization, we're a law enforcement organization. Essentially, there are a lot of laws in place that we need to protect the oceans, but what's missing is for somebody to enforce those laws. And where that law enforcement vacuum exists, Sea Shepherd tries to fill it. I joined Sea Shepherd when I was 18 years old. That was 17 years ago. I was 14 years old when I saw a picture of a dead Mickey whale being pulled up the slipway of an 8,000-ton factory whaling ship down in the Antarctic. And that image just shocked me to the core. I just could not believe that whaling was still happening in our day and age. I thought that whaling was something that ended with the Save the Whales movement in the 70s and 80s, and to discover that not only was it still going on, but it was happening in one of the most pristine marine environments in the world, the Antarctic, just shocked me to the core. So as soon as I was old enough to submit an application, I applied to join Sea Shepherd, and it's what I've been doing ever since, sailing the 7 seas to defend marine wildlife.
Wow. So yeah, I mean, yeah. So you have spent your whole life protecting the ocean.
I've spent my whole adult life protecting the oceans. I started down in the engine room of a ship that we no longer have, an old vessel called the Farley Moet. I started as an oiler on board. My first 5.5 months on a Sea Shepherd ship entailed cleaning fuel tanks. I'd been on every single fuel tank on board that ship, bucketing out diesel sludge and getting them pristine. And even as I was just ankle deep in diesel sludge, I felt like the luckiest person in the world to be contributing in a small way towards getting this ship out to sea. Because the reality is that on the front lines of marine conservation, in many ways, we're the only sheriff in town.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so you've gone from in the engine room all the way up now. So you've gone second mate, first mate, captain, you're now director of campaigns. When you joined Sea Shepherd, I don't suppose you could have ever imagined getting to this point and having it as all of your adult life.
When I joined Sea Shepherd, I felt so lucky to have a small part to play in a growing movement to defend marine wildlife, to be given the responsibility of a ship, to be given the responsibility of developing and leading campaigns that are defending marine wildlife. I mean, it's a dream come true. I feel like the luckiest person in the world every single morning when I wake up, knowing that I get to live my passion and I get to fight for the values that I believe in, and that I get to go to bed at the end of the day and look back on what we've achieved and realize that countless marine creatures are swimming free because passionate and compassionate people like you and I decided to get involved.
That must just be so fulfilling to be able to make a statement like that.
Well, when we were chasing Japanese whaling ships down in the Antarctic, every day that we shut the whalers down was 20 whales saved. A campaign could save 600, 700, 800 whales that are swimming free in the Southern Ocean right here, right now, because we intervene. And so that's something very concrete. There's a lot of marine conservation organizations out there, but there's various ways to measure success. And we have a very unique way of measuring success. We don't measure our success by our membership base. We have a small but very passionate membership base. We don't measure our success by the number of glossy reports we put out every year. We don't put out any. We measure our success by the number of criminal operations that we shut down. African coastal states, when we assist African coastal states to arrest an illegal trawler, then every day that trawler is detained in port is countless lives saved. And it's marine wildlife returning to an area that's been heavily overfished.
Well, you just said there, so 20 whales a day. I mean, that's a lot, isn't it? In our first ever podcast that we did, episode 1, we spoke about the numbers of humpback whales and blue whales returning to almost pre-whaling numbers since the International Whaling Commission and you guys. Well, you guys have played a massive part in that. So again, you must feel so fulfilled and proud of what you've achieved as an organisation, as an individual.
Well, back in the 1980s, so close were we to losing the great whales that the International Whaling Commission put in place this global moratorium on commercial whaling. And yet certain countries like Japan, Iceland, and Norway, in that time since then, they've together killed over 40,000 whales. So for us, we don't want laws and policies and procedures to just be paper tigers. We give these laws and policies the bite that they deserve. And that's why
need as well, that the bite that they actually need, those laws.
That's right. We chased the Japanese whaling fleet for 9 years down in the Antarctic before the International Court of Justice, the highest court in the world, ruled that what they were doing was in fact illegal because it was commercial whaling. It wasn't scientific whaling, which was what they claimed as their loophole to the moratorium.
Mm.
Well, that leads on nicely to whale wars, really, doesn't it? And the time that you spent down there, did it start 2007, 2008 season, wasn't it?
We actually had a campaign down in the Antarctic in 2002, 2003, and then it would take some years before we would return. We did all in all 10 Antarctic whale defense campaigns, and Whale Wars was on board for 7 of them.
How did that actually come about, Peter? What made that happen? Just a call from a TV company, or something Sea Shepherd promoted?
There is an author named Peter Heller, who is an incredible author, but among many of the books he's written, he wrote a book called The Whale Warriors. This book started from an article he wrote in National Geographic Adventure magazine, which was a magazine at the time. That was read by a producer in New York who decided to make a movie called At the Edge of the World. And Animal Planet saw At the Edge of the World and decided that they wanted to turn it into a television series. They did. Discovery Channel's biggest show at the time, maybe still is, was Deadliest Catch, which was about crab fishermen up in the Bering Sea in some of the worst weather. And I remember Paul Watson telling Animal Planet that he could give them a show with even worse weather and with people not fishing for crabs, but going out to sea to save whales. He thought that would make a lot more compelling television.
And it does. I mean, some of that weather and the storms that you've gone through, the waves that the ice is crazy, isn't it?
It's some of the worst weather in the world. The weather systems down in the Southern Ocean are renowned for these runaway trains of low pressure fronts that just come through and hit you again and again because there isn't really any land mass down there to break them up.
They say that below the 40 degrees in the roaring 40s, there are so many hurricanes they don't even bother to name them.
Yeah, that's absolutely right.
Yeah, one after the other.
And so you go through the roaring 40s, then you get to the furious 50s, then you get to the screaming 60s. And we've been as far south as, I think, 72 degrees south, which is the furthest south that you can get.
Wow.
Cool. So, Whale Wars, so you call yourselves like aggressive non-violence. How do you be non-violent? Because I find it very difficult not to use violence. I don't know how you guys don't do it, really.
Sea Shepherd is a direct action organization, and we directly intervene to protect marine wildlife, but we've never caused an injury, certainly not a death in our entire history. Our policy is, as you say, it's called aggressive nonviolence. And what that means is that if somebody outside our apartments or our homes was kicking a dog, then we would just take a photo of that dog and hand it over to the police. We wouldn't start an online petition asking people to sign on to please have this person stop kicking this dog. We wouldn't start a Facebook group about it, Citizens United, to stop this dog from being kicked. I mean, we would directly intervene and we would take that dog away from that person, and we would make sure that this person never touched that dog again. I'm not a big guy. My nickname on the show was the Hammer, but that's from my surname, Hammerstedt, not because of my body mass. But if I heard a case of domestic violence in the apartment next door to mine, I would just call the police and wait for them to arrive 30 minutes later. I would put my shoulder to the door, and I would probably break my shoulder trying, but I would try to get that door open, because the reality is that evil prevails only when good people do nothing. So if that's how I would react in any of those situations, well, if somebody's about to harpoon a whale, then I'm going to put my ship exactly where it needs to be to prevent that from taking place.
But what stops you from jumping on the boat, a bit like Pete Bethune did after the Addy Gill got sort of sliced in two by a Japanese ship? What stops you from jumping? I'd want to jump on a Japanese boat every single time I saw one and do
confront them.
Something. Yeah, I couldn't sort of, I don't know, I always feel like I want to do more. And when I'm watching the shows.
The reality is that the nonviolence approach was always and will always be the most effective. We were able to block them from killing whales. The strategy was always that we would get onto the slipway of the factory whaling ship, and as long as we could hug that slipway, the stern ramp up the back where they would haul the whale on board the ship for processing on this floating abattoir, if we could keep our ships there, then they just couldn't hunt any whales. The whales had to be transferred on board that ship for processing. So the strategy was actually really, really simple. And as long as we could block them, we were being successful. As long as we could get media attention of what they were doing, we were being successful, because we were pushing Australia and New Zealand to take Japan to the International Court of Justice. And the reality is that when you're a movement to save life, then injuring life is counter to everything you stand for.
Yeah. Yeah, true. And it was very effective, wasn't it? Because you did stop them.
We did. In the years that we chased the Japanese whaling fleet down the Southern Ocean, we saved over 6,000 whales. We generated enough publicity. We put whaling on the political agenda in Australia and New Zealand. These two countries took Japan to the International Court of Justice. The International Court of Justice ruled against the Japanese government, claiming that their whaling was illegal. And the whaling fleet is no longer going down to the Southern Ocean. As it stands now, there is no whaling in the Southern Ocean. And that's the first time in modern history that's been the case.
And that's fantastic. And included in that as well, knowing that, another positive from this virus is that the Icelandic whaling trade is on its knees as well. It's a win all round, isn't it?
The Icelandic whalers are not going out anymore for the moment. The Norwegian whaling fleet is not killing as many whales as they used to because the market simply isn't there in Norway. I think we are starting to see the end of worldwide whaling.
Yeah, and I think Sea Shepherd have played such a massive part. For anyone that hasn't seen Whale Wars, really recommend that they jump on YouTube and watch some of those episodes because they're incredibly well shot. Some of the positions you put yourself in are just amazing. What stands out for you, Peter, as some of the I don't know if scariest moments are perhaps the right word, but the standout moments for you?
I'd say the moments that stand out are every time that we were with the Japanese whaling fleet, they would hunt whales. So we would see whales breaching and doing aerial acrobatics all around us and them, and they would be able to swim free past these killing machines completely unmolested because we were there. So every day seeing whales breach was just a joy, knowing that they were safe because we were there, because our supporters around the world had put us there. But in regards to the most dangerous situation that I've been in, one year we were lucky enough to find the refueling tanker that belonged to the whaling fleet. They would need to refuel 2 or 3 times during a season to stay down there for the 4 months that they'd be hunting for. And we came up with a strategy that if we could block the Japanese whaling fleet from refueling, then we would force them to head home early, short of their quota. And that strategy required me to bring my vessel, the Bob Barker, alongside this refueling tanker, a ship that was 5,000 tons to my 500, and essentially double park them and dare the factory whaling ship, an 8,000-ton 5-story ship, to basically sink us or back down. And in a 5-day confrontation, we jousted over this position. And ultimately, the whaling fleet was not able to refuel. They headed home early that year. They only took 103 whales out of their bogus self-allocated quota of 1,035. And we saved 932 whales. They just got 10% of their quota.
Funny you should mention that incident, because for me, watching the TV series, the one standout moment was when the Nishimaru was behind you. She's 160 meters, you're just 50 meters in the Bob Barker. She's like, from your heli deck, it was like looking where the cameraman was, it was like looking up at the Twin Towers with her bow hanging over your stern. The whole thought process of keeping your crew safe and getting out of that position is the normal, natural thing to do. But for you guys, the natural thing to do was everything in your power to stop that refueling. And that, what you just described, everyone get on YouTube and watch that, because it is a heart in the mouth period. But for you, that must have gone on for quite some time. It wasn't just the 10-minute video shot that was on YouTube.
That's right. This lasted 5 days. And I have to say that the reason that we were able to hold our ground is that it wasn't just me saying that we were going to hold our ground. It was all 30 of my crew were willing to stand their ground. There were another 2 Sea Shepherd ships that were on location. My crew were given the opportunity to disembark the Bob Barker and join one of the other ships that wasn't going to wedge itself between these 2 massive gargantuan vessels. And out of the 30 crew I had on board, all 30 agreed to stay. And that speaks just volumes of the dedication that Sea Shepherd volunteers and Sea Shepherd crew have.
Really does. For everyone to stay there, that must have given you such confidence as the captain of the vessel.
It did. I was so focused on keeping the ship in place. It was very difficult maneuvering between these two vessels. And, I was so concentrated on keeping the position of the Bob Barker alongside the tanker that I hardly even noticed when we started hearing the grinding of metal as our masts above the wheelhouse started to bend and twist as the flayed prow of the 8,000-ton factory whaling ship started trying to push us out of the way. And I remember just focusing on the helm and focusing on the pitch control. And my first mate at the time, I remember her standing to the right of me. And when she said the words, "uh-oh," I looked over at her, and that's when I saw the anchor of the Nishin Maru, like a big black wrecking ball outside the wheelhouse window, just a foot outside, a third of a meter, ready to almost take out the wheelhouse.
Yeah. Meanwhile, for 5 days, you stood your ground.
Yeah.
And, that's all we can say. Fantastic.
Well, we realized we were the only ones on location that could do it. We knew that the Bob Barker was going to be the difference between 932 whales being killed or 932 whales being saved. And for my crew and I, when we head out to sea, we know that we represent the hopes of so many people around the world, divers and surfers and people who come to love the oceans. And making money is a hard thing to do. So when people decide to take their hard-earned money and put it towards a charitable cause, put it towards protecting the oceans, a place that they love, then we realize that when we're on the front lines, we're representing all those people. And I certainly wasn't going to let them down.
Yeah, absolutely. Jim?
Yeah, you can't underestimate what you guys have done, because you're risking your lives every time you go out there, aren't you, to save these whales?
We are risking our lives, but we're taking calculated risks. These aren't unnecessary risks. And throughout human history, Paul Watson will always say that people have risked their lives for other things. People risk their lives for religion. People risk their lives for other people's real estate. People risk their lives for oil wells. I think to risk your life to save a species other than your own is a quite noble reason to risk your life.
Absolutely right. Yeah, absolutely.
So one thing you did know with the whole of the Whale Wars and the Japanese fleet, you knew that other than using their vessels, you weren't going to experience violence from their crew, and they had no guns on board that you would ever think they would turn on you. When we started reading the book Chasing Thunder and you turned your attention on the illegal fishing, now you're interfering with a business that's worth tens of millions to those that were involved. It opened up a new chapter, didn't it?
When the International Court of Justice ruled against the Japanese government in the case of whaling in the Southern Ocean, that caused a 1-year hiatus where the Japanese whaling fleet wasn't going to go down as they tried to restructure their whaling program and label it as something else. And in that 1-year hiatus, we had the opportunity to target a different poaching issue in the Southern Ocean than whaling. And that was namely the poaching of Patagonian and Antarctic toothfish. We were looking for one of 6 vessels that we called the Bandit 6. The ship we really wanted to get was called the Thunder, a vessel that was wanted by Interpol, the International Criminal Police Organization, a vessel that had been blacklisted for 10 years, a ship that in those 10 years had made an illegal profit of over $60 million. And yet nobody was able to stop them. They would repaint their ships constantly. They would change their names often. They would flag to places like North Korea, where it was very difficult to get diplomatic pressure to have them cease their illegal fishing activity. And so ultimately it was up to us to try to find them somewhere in the Southern Ocean. And the strategy was simple. We were going to follow them for however long it took until someone somewhere, someplace would come in and take over what essentially was a citizen's arrest. The idea being that if we were able to find the Thunder and follow them, and if we could keep our eyes on them, then they couldn't change their name, they couldn't change their flag, they couldn't repaint, and we could be this spotlight lighting up their criminal activity to the world, this loud hailer saying, this is where they are, right here, right now, somebody somewhere arrest this ship.
So you spent 110 days over 10,000 miles or 16,000 kilometers. That's a hell of a chase, isn't it?
Well, when we found the Thunder, we found them after just 2 days of searching, which was unbelievable because this is a vessel that no government had seen for over a year and a half. that started what would become the longest chase in maritime history. They tried to lose us in the heavy ice flows that circumvent the Antarctic, but we chased them through the ice. They tried to lose us in the heavy weather that we spoke about before, and we just followed them through the storms. They tried to wait us out by just drifting and testing our patience and hoping that we would break off then. And ultimately, we chased them all the way down from the Antarctic up to the Gulf of Guinea in West Africa.
Quite incredible. How much fuel did you have, Peter? How long more could you have gone on for?
Well, I remember the most challenging part of the campaign was not the ice, it wasn't the weather, it was the drifting and waiting. We had our engine shut off, as they did, so we were only consuming the fuel that our generator was burning. At noon every day, my chief engineer would bring us the fuel figures, and because we were only burning the generator fuel, we were consuming about 500 liters of fuel a day. And looking at the fuel figures of what we had remaining on board, I knew that if the Thunder drifted indefinitely, then we could potentially be out at sea for over 2 years, drifting alongside with them.
Wow.
So I remember going down to my chief cook from Australia, and I asked her if we had enough food to stay out at sea for 2 years. And she said to me, we have enough rice and we have enough beans to survive at sea for 2 years. Survive being
that was good enough.
Right. And again, I gave my crew the opportunity to disembark onto another one of our vessels, the Sam Simon, that had just pulled out 72 kilometers of this illegal fishing net that was abandoned by the Thunder when we found them. It took them 3.5 weeks to do it. An unbelievable effort. And I gave my crew the opportunity to move over to the Sam Simon, which was heading to Mauritius to hand over this net to authorities. And I told them we could potentially be out at sea for 2 years. We have no idea how this will end. We could, after 2 years, follow them into port, and the government in the port in which we pursue them into may not have the political will to even prosecute them. But
may just let them go.
That's right. We had no idea. And yet every day that we're with them, they're not able to fish. And out of 30 crew I had on then, 4 left and 26 stayed on board. 26 people who were willing to sail into the unknown for 2 years. I think that's
a real testament again to the commitment of the crew of the Sea Shepherd ships.
Unbelievable. I was just hoping that my chief engineer wouldn't be one of the people leaving. Thankfully, he stayed on, as did the incredible chief cook.
Amazing. You mentioned that there was various ships involved in the whaling refueling situation, and again, just now you mentioned another ship there pulling in the lines. This is not a cheap business to be involved in doing what you do. How is Sea Shepherd funded?
Sea Shepherd is entirely funded by our donors around the world. We don't get any government money, so it's predominantly people as monthly donors, people who just are compassionate and realize that these problems don't go away by just one sitting on one's couch and hoping that they go away. It requires their own personal involvement. And so we have onshore volunteers who are tabling at events, at music festivals, selling merchandise, and there's Sea Shepherd merchandise available on the Sea Shepherd website, and that's a great way to support us. It's all these small donations all around the world that add up and allow the ships to sail, and they're incredibly expensive to run. The campaign to stop the Thunder, and ultimately the way the chase ended is that the Thunder sank in the Gulf of Guinea. After 110 days unable to shake our pursuit, the captain of the Thunder sank his own ship to destroy the evidence on board. We had to rescue him and his crew. We handed them over to the island state of Sao Tome and Principe in West Africa, and ultimately he was sentenced to 3 years in prison. But that was a campaign that cost 1.4 million euros to pull off. Incredible.
And when you rescued him, and anyone that hasn't read Chasing Thunder, you've got to get a copy. It's an incredible book. When you took the crew on board, you had no idea what reaction they were going to have after all this chase that's gone on for this length of time and 10,000 miles across the ocean. You didn't know if they were armed, if they had guns. You obviously, as a mariner, you've got to rescue them and take them on board. How did that feel for your crew?
So once the Thunder was sinking, an obligation under the Safety of Life at Sea Convention to stand by and assist. Thankfully, the Sam Simon, the Bob Barker sister ship, was there as well. It was decided that the Sam Simon would take on the Thunder crew because they hadn't pursued the Thunder for as long, so potentially there was less bad blood there between the crews. The Thunder crew members were taken on one by one, and they were thoroughly searched once on board the ship. We had a designated area of the vessel that they were sort of contained to for the remainder of their time at sea with us. But it was something we took seriously. We knew that this vessel was linked to organized crime in Spain. The fishing master on board, he owned a company back in the day that was busted by Spanish Guardia Civil, the federal police, for importing 2 tons of cocaine into the north of Spain. So these are not just your average poachers. These are organized criminals.
It just shows the level of money involved. That's the type of criminals behind it. What's happened to the other 5 ships, Peter?
What was amazing is because this chase lasted such a long time, because it spanned 110 days, we had media start reporting on it. The chase of the Thunder made the front page of the New York Times above the fold, and people started asking themselves and asking of their governments, why was it the responsibility of a small non-governmental organization to do the work that the governments should be doing? And so after the Thunder sank, once again, like with the issue of whaling, we had put an Antarctic conservation issue on the political agenda. Governments felt like they were forced to act. And therefore, after the Thunder sank, we saw another 2 vessels out of the Bandit 6 arrested in Cabo Verde in West Africa, or Cape Verde. We saw another vessel arrested in Indonesia by the Indonesian authorities. 1 vessel was arrested in Senegal, and another was arrested in Malaysia. So in just a year after the Thunder sank, all 6 of the Bandit 6 had been brought to justice. And just as we ended whaling in the Antarctic, we also shut down illegal fishing.
But you have, and that's not just those ones. You got a military honour, didn't you, from Liberia for your assistance in shutting down another 14 illegal and unregulated fishing vessels?
Well, after chasing the Thunder for so long, I remember watching the ship sink and thinking, why, out of all the places in the world, did they decide to sink the ship in the Gulf of Guinea? They could have sunk this ship anywhere, right? And when we handed over the Thunder crew to the Sao Tome Coast Guard, we realized that the Sao Tome Coast Guard only had a couple of small coastal patrol vessels. Their range was limited. It couldn't cover the entirety of their waters, and it certainly couldn't reach the site of the Thunder sinking. So the captain of the Thunder knew that no Coast Guard or Navy was going to be able to come out to his ship and put on submersible pumps and keep it afloat. He knew the vessel would go down and the evidence with it. And so the same reason for why the Thunder sank in the Gulf of Guinea is the same reason why the Gulf of Guinea is an area that's a hotbed of drug trafficking, human trafficking, illegal fishing, transshipment. Namely, this is an area where there is inadequate monitoring, control, and surveillance. And that's why we started partnering up with countries in the area. And 3 years ago, we started working with the West African country of Liberia. We provide the ship, we provide the crew, we provide the fuel. The government of Liberia provides the Coast Guard sailors with the authority to board, inspect, and arrest vessels that are violating the law. And in the course of that partnership, we assisted Liberia to arrest 15 vessels for illegal fishing. And that's the reason why the president of Liberia gave Sea Shepherd the Distinguished Service Order, which is the highest military order that the country gives.
What a fantastic initiative. And so what's next then for Sea Shepherd and for you, Peter? I know obviously you're stuck in lockdown, as half the world is at the moment, and the ship's somewhere in Europe, your ship, Bob Barker. What's next in the journey?
So after chasing Japanese whaling ships for 10 years, I remember, it's still today, I'm celebrating the fact that we saved 6,000 whales. And there was a statistic that I came across while we were chasing the Thunder that really struck its chord with me. And that was that every single year, industrial fishing is responsible for killing over 300,000 whales and dolphins as bycatch, as this unintentional catch. So while we had saved 6,000 whales chasing whalers in the Antarctic, 300,000 whales and dolphins were being killed every single year as bycatch. And so for for us to be able to maximize our advocacy for marine mammals, we had to focus on overfishing. And since illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing is 15 to 40% of the global catch of fish, we had to focus on illegal fishing where the law was on our side. And that's why we started partnering with these different countries. We now have partnerships with Benin, the Gambia, Liberia, Gabon, Sao Tome and Principe, Namibia, Tanzania. Together with these countries, we've assisted them to arrest 52 vessels for illegal fishing and other fisheries crimes. And our goal is to continue building on those relationships, expanding to new partnerships. And as soon as this COVID-19 situation is resolved, then our ships will continue with that really important work.
And is the fleet expanding? Have you got more ships coming on board?
Sea Shepherd's always expanding. It's slow growth, but we are always growing. And but to grow and to grow the capacity of the fleet, we need the support from people all around the world, especially ocean lovers, people who are divers, people who are surfers, people who have seen, especially people who have been diving a long time. They are firsthand witnesses to what is the depreciation of marine ecosystems. And it's not enough to just love something. You also have to fight for what you love.
Yeah, never a truer word. Clearly, you're very happy when you're on board the Bob Barker. Is that where you see yourself personally as staying as a captain and being there right at the sharp end?
Well, I don't know. The Bob Barker was built in 1950. I don't know how many years that vessel has left. But, yeah. but I'll certainly sail with her until her dying day. It's a vessel we've been through a lot together. We chased the Thunder together. We blocked the refueling of the Nishin Maru together. It's a vessel that I think we have a tendency to anthropomorphize vessels. We give them sort of human characteristics. And so I feel a very, very tight bond with that ship. And I do imagine that I will sail with her for as long as I can.
And will that become an artificial reef like the Steve Irwin one day?
You know, it would be amazing if the vessel can continue to be a monument for what's possible when kind people decide to actually do something to turn the tide of destruction against our oceans. And it would be sad to see the vessel cut into pieces. Hopefully it can be a statement somewhere somehow and can continue its conservation message.
Yeah, although I hope you continue with her for many years to come. Yeah. One day I will dive on her.
Yeah.
It would be amazing. You shouldn't have to wait for that. You can certainly dive on her now and join as a volunteer, help clean up the barnacles, clean out our intakes.
More than happy.
Scrub our prop.
Jim and I will hold you to that.
Well, it's amazing. I've had the privilege of seeing whales in all different parts of the world. And certainly Australia is known as one of the big whale watching capitals of the world. And yet one of the places where I've had the most whale sightings is actually off the coast of West Africa in Gabon, where we've been working for the past 4 years. Just an unbelievable place with lots of biodiversity. People call it the last Eden in Africa, where the whale sharks congregate there. It's a beautiful place that you certainly should visit. And if you want to do that on a Sea Shepherd ship, then we should have that conversation.
So does our volunteer form get shoved to the top then?
Make a note in it and link to our interview, but I don't think I'll be forgetting about you guys anytime soon.
That's very kind of you.
Peter said.
Yeah. Hey, I'm a great barnacle cleaner as well. Fantastic barnacle cleaner.
Yeah, we've heard that about you, Jim.
Yeah. Put it in your application. Thankfully, we have it on record here as well.
Yeah.
Peter, it's been fascinating to talk to you, and I hopefully at some stage in the future we'll be able to do something else and get together with you again. But really, really appreciate your time, and Jim and I are over the moon that you decided to come on and have a chat with us.
Well, it's my absolute pleasure. We have a lot of support in the diving community, so it's a privilege to spend some time with guys who love diving as much as our supporters do, and also guys who share our passion for Sea Shepherds. So thank you for that, and we have great support in the UK as well, so it's great to spend a bit of time with two guys from the island.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Jim.
Yeah, it's just been an absolute honour to have you on, to be honest. I think, for me, humpback whales, I saw them in Australia, you mentioned earlier. it's quite an emotional thing when you see them after watching whale wars and then having to see them and seeing them breach and stuff like that. So to have someone on like yourself that's saved these, they might even save that whale that I saw that breached, is just quite an incredible thought, really.
Well, I appreciate that, but it's all the people who donated and all the people who volunteered and all the people who crew on the ships that are responsible for those successes. And so, if you're a financial supporter of Sea Shepherd, if you volunteer your time with Sea Shepherd, if you buy Sea Shepherd merchandise and wear it proudly, then when you see these humpbacks, you do realize that you are one of the reasons that they are protected.
Yeah,
so that credit is shared by all.
We've all got official Sea Shepherds.
We do feel like we're making a difference, and when we put this episode out, Peter, obviously we'll link you to that, but we'll put a donate button, so hopefully as many people as can just a small contribution will all helps.
I appreciate that, guys. Thank you so very much. If anyone decides to donate, then we will do our utmost to turn those generous donations into direct results at sea.
Brilliant.
Excellent. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you.
So these two guys are going to be coming back in the next couple of weeks to chat to us in a bit more depth into their dive centres and what they're doing now, how they're finding things, and what's in store for the future. So we look forward to seeing you guys back in a couple of weeks.
Great.
Happy to be back.
Yeah, and thanks, guys, for coming on and having a chat with Paul. And we look forward to having a more in-depth chat with both of you very soon.
Great. It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. See you soon.